My name's Daisy and I have the joy of starting a new series. So we're kicking off the next 4 weeks. We're doing a new series called Words of Wisdom. And if you're thinking, Daisy, you have no business talking to us about wisdom, don't worry, we're all learning all together. This is going to be for all of us. So Words of Wisdom, we're going to be looking at the book of Proverbs. You may be familiar, you may have read it, you may have not. It's okay, we're going to be looking at it together today. So a bit about the book of Proverbs, because we learned a couple of weeks ago in our talk about the Bible that the books of the Bible have different meanings and different purposes. So what is the purpose of and what is the meaning of the book of Proverbs? So Proverbs is very different to any other text in the Bible. It is a collection of practical life wisdom, and it's given mostly in really short, memorable statements. So it doesn't really read like a story, it reads in shorter statements. And it's part of a larger collection of texts called the wisdom texts. There's a few of them. These include Job and Psalms and Ecclesiastes. And like I said, it's not a story, it's not quite a poem, and it's not a list of instructions either. But the book of Proverbs is really unique in that in its structure because, like I said, it's mostly a collection of individual statements, and it can read a bit like they're sort of plopped together with no real organisation or context sometimes. But it's really unique because it is mostly concerned with practical life wisdom, more than ideas about God and his greatness. And this doesn't mean that it's not a spiritual book, because it is. But it just really mainly has some really practical ideas for us and practical elements to help us in our day-to-day life. And it's important to remember throughout this series that some of the Proverbs we read and will come across are meant to be taken really literally, and some of them are not. It's a bit like how we might say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. We don't literally mean that eating one apple means you never have to go to the doctor. We mean that what we eat directly impacts our health. So it's important to remember that going forward. Some of the things we'll read are quite literal, and some of them are a bit more figurative. And the points made in the book of Proverbs, they're meant to be remembered and pondered, and they're not always intended to be applied across the board for every single situation in your life. So it really is a super practical book. So we're going to start by reading the verse today, the passage, which is in Proverbs chapter 1. If you've got a Bible, I'd encourage you to get it out. We're going to be popping back to it several times. If you've got a digital one, that's fine as well. We're going to be Proverbs 1, it's in the Old Testament, and we're going to be reading the first 7 verses together. And it reads this: The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction to prudent behaviour, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, if you do have a Bible handy with you, I would encourage you to keep it out because we're going to be doing today a bit of a verse-by-verse study, so we're going to be popping back to it. If you've got a digital one, that's fine, and feel free to take notes. I won't think you're being rude by typing on your phone, as long as you're not actually texting your friends. I wouldn't know anyway. It's fine, I wouldn't know. So let's start with verse 1. We have verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Who is Solomon? Well, the collection of Proverbs was written mostly by King Solomon, and he was the king of Israel about 900 years before Jesus came to earth. And he was known for his wisdom. In fact, when God said that he would grant him anything, Solomon asked for wisdom. He could have asked for anything, and he chose to ask for wisdom. Solomon was not the only author of this book, though. The book itself says that there are a few other authors that contributed to it, but it's likely that Solomon compiled these wisdom texts together and put them in the one book. Now, I'm a youth worker. We're kicking off with a game, everybody, and arguably my favourite game. Get ready for Solomon or Sheeran. Thank you very much. I am going to share a quote with you guys, and you are going to vote whether you think it was written in the Bible by King Solomon or whether it was written by our very own Ed Sheeran. How we're going to vote is, I'm going to say the quote. If you think it was by Solomon, you're going to do a Bible. And if you think it was Sheeran, you're going to do a microphone. Are we understood on the rules? Great. There will not be a prize for the winner. Okay, the first one is, don't give them a second look. Don't listen to them for a minute. What are we thinking? Couple of Eds, couple of Solomons. Don't give them a second look. Don't listen to them for a minute. It was Solomon. See, it's harder than you thought, isn't it? Okay, next one. Another day, another life passes by. Oh, we're quite confident with Ed Sheeran on that one. You are correct. Well done, everyone. That was Ed Sheeran. The next one. And you know I've learned from my mistakes and how much I've got to lose. Okay, we're slightly mixed on this one. That was good old Ed Sheeran. Plot twist. We've only got two more, bear with me. Okay, last one. Nothing you could wish for holds a candle to her. Nothing you could wish for holds a candle to her. Some confidence. It is the Bible. Solomon. Crazy. I know. I am using the Message version, which might be throwing people off. I should have led with that, but that's great. And last one. Throw your arms around her. Believe me, you won't regret it. Never let her go. It's the Bible. Crazy. That was also Solomon. Okay, we've loosened up. We're great. Welcome to a talk with Daisy. Lovely. If you do know anything about King Solomon, you might know that even though he was very wise, he actually made some incredibly unwise and arguably catastrophic decisions as well. He implemented forced labor while building a temple for God and his own palace. He married many numerous women from forbidden tribes, which was a direct violation of God's command to only have one wife. And as a result, he was influenced to build temples and worship other gods and false gods. So you can read, if you'd like to, more about his life in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. There's a lot about him. So we have to ask the question, what on earth are we doing listening to a guy who made such bad decisions, and what business does he have us telling us how to be wise? Well, firstly, as we learned a few weeks ago in our series on the Bible, the entire Bible is God-inspired, which means that Proverbs was not solely written by Solomon, it was written by God as well. This means that we can trust that there is really spiritually helpful truth in there, even if the man who wrote it was a flawed person. Secondly, the Bible often records actions of individuals, both good and bad, to show God's relationship with us, to show that even when we do things wrong, God will welcome us back and use us every single time. And lastly, no human has gone their whole lives not making any immoral or bad decisions. And this demonstrates that even the wisest person like Solomon can fall away from God if he does not center his heart on God. It's not that he became any less wise, he just chose not to act on it. And you see, the Bible is filled with wise and spiritual words written by people who failed miserably, but that actually makes it a lot more relatable. If it were written by people who never failed or never messed up, we'd have no hope of being holy like them or being used by God like them. But it shows us that despite our failures and our messes, we can still be close to God and used by God, and we can come back to him every time. And we can still give advice to other people based on our poor experiences. For example, I have a friend who shall remain completely nameless. And when I asked them what advice they would give their child in future, they don't have a child, but I said, what advice would you give your child if you could only give them one piece of advice? And they said, without missing a beat, never fart in a hot shower. I checked I was allowed to say fart on stage. Don't worry, guys. But they weren't saying that out of a place of righteousness. They weren't saying that out of a place of righteousness, but from lived experience. So actually, the fact that Solomon has messed up means he's got a lot of experience to learn from, and we can listen to his wisdom because he got it wrong so many times. Okay, moving down to verse 2. Sorry, I've set the vicar off. My bad. Okay, verse 2, on to wisdom. Maybe it wasn't wise to say far from the stage. Anyway, verse number 2, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. So right here we are opening this collection of writings by explaining that the purpose of these sayings is wisdom. They're intended to give the reader wisdom and perception and understanding for their life. And we're living in a time where information has never been so readily accessible. We can find the answer to most questions in a matter of seconds by the computer that lives in our pocket. We have artificial intelligence, and we could just have so much information available to us. But this certainly does not mean that this generation is any wiser than any of the generations before. You see, we're facing many of the same issues as those that wrote these texts, and I know I can speak for myself when I say that I am often making unwise choices. And that wisdom is not a matter of information or education or even necessarily lived experience, but wisdom is a trait that we can seek and we can pray for and we should act on. And wisdom is also not the same as knowledge. My dad always used to say that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. They are very different things. And both wisdom and knowledge are used many times in the Bible, but they mean different things. Knowledge is the accumulation of information and facts and actually having some head knowledge, but wisdom is the application of that knowledge. What are you going to do with it? Imagine that you've been to college to study finance and you've learned all about bank accounts and interest and savings and other money things that I don't quite know. But when you get home, you blow all your money and all your cash on things that you don't really need, and you don't have anything left over for things like bills or food, the essentials. You may have a lot of head knowledge. You may know how all the financial systems works, but you might not have the wisdom to actually act on it. So right at the start here of this passage, we are told that the aim here is to gain wisdom and to understand the insights of the wise. And we're not gaining wisdom just to gain wisdom. That's not the point. We're gaining wisdom to know God better. When Paul was writing to the church in Ephesus, he said this: "I keep asking that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better." By gaining wisdom, we are knowing God better and deeper. And our Christian life must be centered around this, wanting to know God deeper and wanting to know God better. We're not trying to be the wisest for being wise's sake, but to know God more and more. And so all things flow from God. So the more that we understand God, the more that we can understand ourselves and everything around us. Moving down to verse 3, it says this: "For receiving instruction in prudent behaviour, for doing what is right and just and fair." You might be wondering what prudent behaviour is. I will not be ashamed to admit I had to Google the word prudent. I didn't know what that meant. So if you don't know, that's fine. You're in good company. But basically, prudent or prudence means acting with care or forethought for the future. And this is starting to show us really how practical this book actually is. It's really right and good that we have an eternal perspective and we think about our eternity with Jesus and a life after this life. But also, we can't live life in a careless way. It might come to bite us in the backside. This you only live once mentality, it would get us into trouble quite quickly. Because being prudent might initially sound quite boring. Oh, I have to think about tomorrow and I have to care about stuff. But actually, if you act in an opposite way, that can be really boring in and of itself. What I mean is this: when I first got a job at 18, I would spend all my paycheck I don't know actually. I've got nothing to show for it. I would blow all my paycheck every month and I would put nothing away into savings. And that felt really great at the time, but then when it came to Christmas or birthdays or being invited to holidays or going out and doing other stuff, I often had nothing spare. And I might have thought I was living my best life in the moment, living day to day, but actually, when I was not worrying about tomorrow, when tomorrow actually came, I found myself quite limited. And God doesn't encourage us to be prudent, to be boring or strict, that's not the point, but so that we can have a fuller and wiser life. I've used money as an example here, but as we go through the Proverbs, you'll see that money is by no means the only example of how to live wisely. It might be that you're really unwise in your friendships, so that when the time comes to have a friend, no one's there for you. It might be that you're unwise in forgiveness, so that when you really need forgiveness, people aren't willing to give it to you. There are lots and lots of ways that we should be prudent in our behaviour, thinking about what's to come. And God wants us to take thought into the life that he's given us. He's given us a really precious life, and he wants us to treat it with care. And he wants us to use our gifts really wisely. And this verse also tells us that wise people will be right and just and fair. So if we receive these teaching with open hearts and open minds, justice and equity will flow from us. And this means we'll be people that try to do right according to God. We will strive for justice in this world. We'll treat people fairly. And it's an interesting comparison that wisdom here is linked with being just and right and fair. Because we don't have to look very far to see people who are acting wrongly and who treat people unfairly and who do not care about justice. And I wonder whether it's world leaders or people you actually know. When you think of those people, it's very often that they are also incredibly unwise as well. Justice and fairness are really closely linked with wisdom. James chapter 3 says this: "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." These things are all really linked all throughout the Bible. And just to be really clear, we are not saved or made right with God through our good works. Just to be really clear about that. But our behaviour is an outward expression of our relationship and walking with God. There is nothing we could do to earn God's love, but that is actually really, really good news. You will never be able to earn God's love, but that is great news. It means we don't have to try and be loved by God. We just are loved by God. It means that any striving to be holy or work our way to God should just be left at the door, because we are just loved unconditionally by the one who made us. But it's what we do with that love that really matters. You see, we don't treat people fairly to get God to love us. We treat people fairly because we're loved enough to know that God values all people. And we don't do the right thing because we think that will make God love us more. We do the right thing because we are so loved by God, we know that that is the right thing to do. And that his love will overflow from us. And this verse is telling us that wisdom is really crucial in that and how we act. As we grow in wisdom, we grow in our understanding of God and his love for us. And our actions will end up reflecting that. So being wise and doing right things and being just is not the goal. The goal is being wise so we can honour God and honour people through our actions. The goal is wisdom that changes us and changes people around us. We move down to verse 4 now. It says, "For giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young." Prudence, again, here meaning care or forethought. To the simple, and to be clear, simple here isn't the word stupid as some people might use it. It's the slightly better translation might be naive or unaware, something like that. And let's face it, we've all been naive and unaware at some point, so we could all do with some of that wisdom. But this is saying that you don't need to be a rocket scientist or even have completed high school to be wise. You can understand the advice which has been completely laid out for us. It's for everyone to understand, and it doesn't correlate with intelligence. You can have a PhD and be incredibly intelligent and not be very wise at all, or you can hardly have any education at all and be incredibly wise. This verse also says, knowledge and discretion to the young. And I think it's interesting for us to stop here for a minute and think about how we view the young. When we think of the kids and the teenagers in our lives, I wonder what comes to mind for you. Is it chaos or joy or a bit of everything all mixed into one? And if you don't have children, I want you to still think about how we treat the young people. As part of a church, we are part of a family, and that means that children and young people are a non-negotiable part of it, which is lovely for most of us. And obviously, as a youth worker, I have a soft spot for teenagers and that awkward stage of life that they find themselves in. Perhaps you remember it yourself. Your body's changing. You fancy someone for the first time. You're having mood swings. It's a really turbulent time for them. Voice cracks and mood swings. Anyone remember those times? Lovely. The joy of puberty. But God made this stage of human life. He chose to include puberty as part of the human process, which means that it is a holy process, and it means it's a good thing, even though it might not feel like it. And a lot is happening in a child's brain at this time. In fact, we're going to go on a little science detour. In early adolescence to the early 20s is when a huge amount of brain remodeling happens for these young people. The brain becomes more efficient in this time by getting rid of pathways that haven't been used since childhood and reinforcing the ones that are currently used. However, while this remodeling is happening, the brain often relies on a part of the brain called the amygdala to do the decision making while remodeling the house. It's not kind of ideal, but it's fit for purpose. It's a bit like if you're remodeling your house and the kitchen's out of use, so you eat your dinner on the dining, like on the floor. It will do, but it's not great for now. The only problem with this is that the amygdala is the part of the brain, so now the part of the brain that's making the decisions for young people, is the part of the brain that deals with emotions, impulses, aggression, and instinctive behaviour, which sounds about right. So when preteens, and actually all the way up to early 20s, are making some absolutely shocking decisions, and you're thinking, what is going on in your brain? Try and remember that their brains are being controlled by a completely different part of the brain than ours are. And they're wired to be risk takers, to see what the outcome will be. And they are often really impulsive because their brain is just doing a bit of remodeling. So why am I talking about the brain of a teen? Well, I think it's not a coincidence that the young are spoken about in the introduction of the book of Proverbs. See, young people are in a really turbulent time. And this book is not only relatable and helpful for adults, but also for young people as well. And we, as the adults in their lives, have a bit of a responsibility not only to teach them how to be wise, but to actively model what it is to be wise. They may be impulsive and sometimes moody, but actually these young people are really capable of receiving the instruction just like adults, and they might surprise you with what they do with it. But I wonder what wisdom you might be able to give to the younger generation. Could you model practical or spiritual wisdom? Maybe apologising to others, or working hard, or being willing to learn. And even if you don't directly have children, nieces or nephews or anything like that, there are young people right here in this church that are going to be influenced and moulded by something, and I really want them to be influenced and moulded by you guys and this church family. So what kind of wisdom can you give on to these young people? Moving down to verse 5, it says this: let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. So we've just spoken now about how the simple need wisdom and how the young need wisdom. Well, apparently the already wise still need more wisdom. We all need to be adding to our learning. And this points us to something really crucial about God's upside down kingdom. We can never think we've reached the end of learning or journeying with God. There is always something more to learn. And it's important that we don't get complacent and we don't get arrogant and we think that we've completed Christianity and we're sorted and we've got it all sorted. The foolish think that they've got it all figured out. And the foolish believe that they have nothing else to learn. But the wise know that there is always something to learn from a situation. They will be always open to learning more, which is the very thing that makes them wise. You may know someone like I'm about to describe. They are a seasoned Christian. They've been walking with Christ for decades. They are wise and you can trust them for some godly advice. And they've read the Bible cover to cover several times. You might be thinking of someone. I know I've got someone like that. And you might think that they're the sort of person that feels like they've completed Christianity. They've done it all before. They've done the scriptures and the Bible studies, and they've heard more preachers than I've had hot dinners. But what's really interesting about this type of person is that they never think they are done at all. If you ask them, they never get bored of the Bible. There is always something more to learn and discover. And this is the beauty of walking with God. We're never done. We're never done, and that's wonderful. Let's never get to a place where we feel like we're sorted and we've completed our walk with God and we're a seasoned Christian. No, there is always something to learn, always something to grow in, and there's always more wisdom to achieve. This verse also says, let the wise listen. We have to listen. And as someone who talks a lot, as you may have noticed this morning, this is something I've been trying to learn and probably will continue to be learning for the rest of my life. I am a complete talker. I talk very loud and I talk very fast. In fact, at my last church, they would always hand me a specific microphone and I never knew why. And then I found out in the 8th year of working there that the volume was lower because I was too loud for the original microphones. So I am an openly admitted talker. But even if you're not a talker like me, we can all benefit from listening more. To others, listening to God, listening to advice, listening to scripture. Here's just a few scriptures that talk about it. James 1 says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak and slow to anger. Proverbs 18, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Proverbs 19, listen to advice and accept instruction that you may gain wisdom in the future. Listening is a really, really powerful tool. And if you don't know where to start with wisdom, if you're thinking, I want to be a bit wiser, but you don't know where to start, listening is a really, really good start. Listening to those around you and God's word. Let's try and be quick to listen. And if you're a talker like me, there's an interesting exercise you can do. When you next have a conversation with someone, see how long it takes for your brain to want to interrupt them. You don't have to actually do it, but when is your brain gearing up and ready to interrupt them? Because the average is 7 seconds, just so you know. The average is 7 seconds. But that shows we're all quite quick, ready to say the next thing, aren't we? Let's all be better listeners. Maybe let's not all try that after the service, though, otherwise we'll be in silence just listening to each other. Find another time. But it would be an interesting exercise, and maybe try and train yourself to listen more. Listening is also it's a skill and it's not a gift, which is really good. It means we can all learn how to listen. It's not, some people might be born slightly better listeners, but actually we can all grow in our listening. We can all grow in that skill together. So listening is key when it comes to wisdom. Moving down to verse 6, it says this, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. So all these things we've learned in the first few verses, gaining instruction, being prudent and being quick to listen, they are all ways in which we can understand the proverbs. Some proverbs are really completely practical when you go through and read them. Some of them are just straight up practical advice, and some of them might be slightly more spiritual advice. But every proverb is meant to be thought about and contemplated. That's how they were written. They weren't meant to be powered through. You're meant to sort of mull these over. Not read like a story or a law or a poem, but instead we're meant to consider the impact of these sayings on our lives and how they might affect us. See, the whole book of Proverbs boils down to us having a better understanding of the truth of the world and God. And it does this by providing these practical principles and examples and illustrations that will guide us. And this is not about rules, it's about guidance that will lead us to a fulfilling life. We won't be able to go through the whole book of Proverbs in this series. We're only going to be touching on 4 of the Proverbs. So my challenge to you is to read one proverb each week in the month of August and really mull it over and see how it impacts your day-to-day life. Maybe read the same one every day for a week and see how it impacts your life. Moving down to our final verse, got verse 7, which says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And here we get to the main theological principle. The beginning of knowledge and wisdom comes from the fear of the Lord. Now, the fear of the Lord, if you've not been a Christian before, if this is your first time, you might be thinking, are we supposed to be scared of God? Are we meant to be afraid of him? Well, when Christians talk about the fear of the Lord, we're speaking of a reverence of God. And a reverence basically means total respect and worship and adoration. We're saying that we are aware of the great might of God and the great awesome works that he can do, and that he is creator of all things. And we're not to be scared of God. We don't have to be scared because God is love. He is completely loving. We are not to be scared of God. But we are to be aware of his might and his power and all that he is capable of. So when we read that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, we are understanding that apart from God, there is only so far that you can get with wisdom. Right relationship with God is a crucial part for gaining wisdom, as God is completely wise. So to separate them, you would never get the full picture. This verse also says that fools despise wisdom and instruction. I lived with my mum and dad for 27 years of my life. God bless them. God bless me. We made it out alive. We're all okay. Very kind of them. However, a point of friction was the kitchen. When I was cooking, I would say that my mum came to meddle. She would say she came to give motherly advice. I would very often ignore this motherly advice and go my own way because I was a 20-year-old, and that's pretty standard, I fear. However, my meals almost always would have turned out better if I had just listened to the instruction of my mum. Fools despise wisdom and instruction, and I was completely foolish in those moments. I should have not despised the instruction that my mum was giving me. But these opportunities continue throughout all our lives. We must be willing to learn and take instruction from other people, from scripture, from experiences. We must be willing to take this criticism. We don't want to be fools who don't grow in wisdom. We want to be followers of Christ who are constantly learning with humility what it is to live a wise life. I will close with some good news though. Wisdom is available for all of us. James 1:5 says that if any of us lacks wisdom, we should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding any fault, and it will be given to us. We can ask for wisdom, and God in his kindness will give it to us. I'm not saying that you will wake up tomorrow like Einstein. It might be a slightly different process than that. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, I asked God for patience, and instead he gave me situations to be patient about. It might be like that. Maybe when we're asking for wisdom, it might be that God gives us more situations where we can choose to be wise. He might surround you with people that model wisdom so you can learn from them. Or he might surround you with people who correct you humbly. He might give you chances to exercise justice and fairness. He might surround you with a young person so you can show them wisdom. God can choose to work in your life and grow your wisdom in whatever way he sees fit, but he has promised to do it in this text. If you ask, he has promised to help you grow in wisdom. There is a slight warning here, though, in not listening to wisdom. You see, God is not shy about the fact that his way is best. And if we continue to do our own thing and we continue to turn our back on God, then there will likely be earthly and eternal consequences. God is not shy about that fact. See, later on in this very chapter in Proverbs 1, it says, but since you refuse to listen when I call, and no one pays attention when I stretch out my hand, since you disregard all my advice and do not accept my rebuke, I will laugh when disaster strikes you, and I will mock when calamity overtakes you. Proverbs 13 states, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things. And you also might be familiar with the passage in Matthew 7 about two men. One of them was wise and built his house on a rock, which symbolizes building your house on God. And the other man was a fool and built his house on the sand, which symbolizes doing your own thing and going your own way. And when the storm came, the one who stood was the one who built their house on the Lord. You see, God's offer of wisdom is not to control us, but it's to bless us and help us to keep living a fulfilling life. There is a life of closeness with God that's on offer here for us, to know him deeper, where we can make wise choices for our own lives. See, we don't want to be stuck in the consequences of our unwise decisions. If you've ever made an unwise decision, you know that can often have consequences. We don't want to be stuck in that, and God's trying to free us from that. And you might have arrived today considering yourself a pretty wise person on the scale of things, or you might have arrived and thought, I'm actually pretty unwise. I keep making really awful decisions. But what's clear from this is that the journey to wisdom is one that is never done. It's never completed, and that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. There is nothing to complete or check off to say, I've done it, I've got wisdom now, I've got my badge, I'm sorted. But it's a journey with God where we continue it our entire lives. And we have the privilege of walking with our Creator. That's just so special. Sometimes I can't get my head around it. We get to walk with the one who made us through our whole lives, and we get to live our lives for his glory. And what a journey he invites us to be a part of.